Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Elevate Your Business. Today is the final installment of our three-part mini-series on getting innovative business models adopted in traditional industries. Once again, we're joined by our guest, Mastrovito Associates owner Nick Mastrovito, who's been walking us through his own shift from traditional contingency recruiting to a fractional subscription-based model. In episode 2, Building Trust Through Transparency, we dug into the emotional side of change, including why conservative business leaders are cautious, how transparency lowers their guard, and how genuine relationship building creates the safety needed to try a new approach. We talked about using open communication, clear expectations, and honest conversations about risk and reward to replace fear with confidence and turn skepticism into curiosity. Today, in episode 3, the implementation bridge from concept to conversion, we're taking everything from the first two conversations and crossing the bridge into execution. We'll get specific about the systems and processes Nick is putting in place to create predictable outcomes in his fractional recruiting model, how he's managed longer-term client relationships in a subscription world, and Nick's evolving RAYWI strategy he's using to reach his goal within 2 years. We'll also explore how to find and develop mutually meaningful relationships with ideal customers, and how to thoughtfully transition existing contingency clients while attracting new clients who already understand and value this fractional approach. And finally, we'll close with one powerful takeaway, Nick's single most important message for any business owner trying to change a paradigm with their solution. Nick, welcome back to our final episode. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, Ed. Thank you so much for having me once again. I appreciate it.
Well, this has been an excellent series. To start, what specific systems and processes have you or are you putting in place to help support your new RAYWI model?
Thanks, Ed. That's a great question. And yeah, I wanted to focus on the RAYWI model, the recruiting as you want it versus just fractional recruiting. Although fractional recruiting plays a very important role in this RAYWI model. To get started, the concept of doing fractional recruiting or doing RAYWI, because it's not like I can only do fractional, or it's not like I can only use one portion, one mode of recruiting. I could see companies where there may be several different types of recruiting they need. So this will apply to any of those, whether it stays with some contingency, there may be some self-sourcing, and then there may be some fractional. But I think the most important thing is get to know the client. Start off with a kickoff meeting, do a discovery phase, perhaps implement line of sight. Line of sight's a strategy execution assessment that directly links to talent strategy. And then, come up with a smart recruiting plan, with measurable goals, deadlines, weekly, bi-weekly sprints with, hey, this is how many qualified candidates I want to deliver to you so that next week you can have 4 or 5 interviews. This will also immediately flag bottlenecks and allow for real-time course corrections rather than, hey, go find me some candidates, and on my side, when I find you some qualified candidates, I'll send them to you. We need to be more distinct. We need to have a real process in place rather than happenstance. And then weekly accountability meetings so that we can understand, why am I not providing the amount of candidates you actually need to fill these roles? What's stopping us? And that's some feedback that I try to give to my clients right now. The salary range is too low, or location is causing a problem. So is there a way that you as a client, can you help that situation with perhaps increasing the salary range or offering some other types of benefits that will attract the right kind of candidates? From the technology and data infrastructure means, integrating predictive index. Predictive index will not only help you understand who this candidate is, but you can also say, hey, I'm looking for these characteristics. I think this candidate is someone that will be good for this role, but let's make sure they also have the right behavioral characteristics. And let's also make sure that if there's a ramp up time that this candidate needs to learn how to do something, how quickly can they learn how to do that? And then the other thing is a little bit about data-driven forecasting, using analytics to try to drive this process as quickly as possible.
When I think about your RAYWI model, you've got contingency on the far left, you've got fractional on the far right, and in between, you've got these three other options. When you're considering all the conversations that you're in, do you have a set of questions or an approach for being able to identify where their biggest needs are and lining them up with one or a couple options within your model framework?
This is all part of the discovery conversation. First of all, how quickly do they need to hire people? And do they have 50 positions or 100 positions open? What's the priority of filling those roles? What's their strategy? What are they doing right now? If I walk into the conversation and everything they're doing is what I'm able to offer them, well, I may be able to help them increase velocity, but am I really doing everything that I possibly can? The answer to that is probably no, because if they're using different modes of finding candidates, if they're doing, like I said, everything that I'm doing, I'm just another recruiter at this point. I'm not actually walking into this conversation saying, hey, let's figure out what's going on here and let's figure out what's the opportunity. How can we do this so that your talent strategy is much more efficient, much more effective than it is today? Sometimes clients don't have enough recruiters and they need some extra help. I don't mind doing that, but I'd rather come in from, let's look at your overall talent strategy and figure out what's the best way to move forward rather than, hey, I got to fill these roles and I need somebody to help me fill those roles. Absolutely. But let's also discover how we can make this whole talent strategy much more efficient.
One of the questions that comes to mind, and I'll state it as a thought first, is that I know as a senior leader in my past roles that time is so precious. And the HR team that's supporting you, myself, and the team around me, we're always rushed to the next priority out there. And one of the reasons that we always looked for recruiters to help us fill our different roles is to speed that time up. And that seems like it would create a challenge to have that broader conversation. Have you thought about that? Do you have an approach on how to, is there a timing and how do you leverage an opportunity to actually extend that conversation beyond just filling a role for them?
Well, that goes back to what kind of relationship am I entering in with this client? If they're just looking for speed, I may not be the right pick for that organization. I could find a dozen offshore recruiting firms that are much cheaper than me that could probably do the same amount of work that I'm doing. So, is that really a great fit? But I go back to, if all you're looking is for velocity, am I really the right solution? In the Army, we used to always say, slow is smooth is fast, which means that do it right, do it effectively, and you're going to actually increase velocity by doing it right the first time. And it also leads to one other part of the conversation, which is the retention side. Yeah, I can find you 5 candidates right now that you could hire, but if they're not the right hires, you just wasted a bunch of money and now you still have 5 empty jobs, right? So looking at it from a more holistic approach, I think actually makes a lot more sense than, hey, got to get it done and we're going to get it done any way we know how.
Yeah, I love that mantra, and that really speaks to having a solid process, and your output has defined within it quality. It's got to be quality, and quality doesn't always come fast. It takes time to find that right fit because if you're going fast, it'd be interesting to see the statistics associated with, oh yeah, I filled all these positions within 30 days. In your particular case, you're dealing with engineers and people that have high technical skills. That's not always the right thing to do. Technical
Right.
skills don't necessarily mean organization culture fit or team fit.
Right.
So, how are you developing better client relationship management skills to support this longer term nature of the subscription based services?
Well, that's a critical part that differentiates a strategic partner from a transactional vendor. The idea of moving to a relationship is, what do the metrics need to look like? In a contingency mode, that's mostly placement driven. It's not partnership driven metrics. So rather than focusing on, hey, I've got 5 roles to fill and let me figure out how quickly I can fill them, or, here's another way to look at it. I have a role that's a 25% fee and I have a role that's a 15% fee. What role do you think I'm going to work on as a transactional contingency recruiter? I'm working on the 25% fee. It may be a harder role to fill, but there's greater reward there. Well, when we shift to a true talent partner, now we're worried about this partnership driven metrics, which is, time to source versus time to fill, number of hires versus candidate quality. You just mentioned quality, candidate quality and retention rates. That has great impact on the business. From a contingency point of view, it's the invoice date versus having good quality strategic reviews, planning not only for what's happening today, but for future needs. A client may say, hey, I have these needs that are going to come in the future. Don't need you to actively start working on it, but let's start thinking about how we're going to plan for those future needs. And then in the contingency role, there's the hiring manager satisfaction. Whereas in the fractional or the strategic partnership, there's the executive leadership and HR partnership score or strategic alignment. So we're focused more on the client in a fractional point of view versus transactional. Hey, I want to find the candidate. I want to present my candidate. I want that candidate to get hired. And that way I can now move on to the next position. And I'm always hunting in that position rather than trying to really understand the company, get a better understanding of what their culture looks like so that it goes beyond just education and experience.
So, given the fact that you've got these 5 different solutions across your RAYWI model, all the way over on that contingency side, and part of that goal is to establish and continue to foster and develop those relationships so that ultimately they may be looking at the more strategic models that you have to offer. When you think about that, do you have 2 or 3 different thoughts, recommendations relative to how you take something that is so transactional and the energy from your client is speed? Are there a few things that you could pass along to say, hey, these are some things, even in this fast-paced world, that you can still do to foster and build that relationship to open up the future conversation for more strategic solutions?
Yeah, I think one of the important things is not all recruiters are created equal. And what I mean by that is I'm focusing on engineering, I'm focusing on AEC, I'm focusing on defense, I'm focusing on manufacturing. I've worked in all of those verticals before, so I have some intrinsic knowledge, whereas perhaps a recruiter that's only been a recruiter all their career, they may not have that real intrinsic knowledge. And so I can sometimes deliver better candidates because I have a better understanding of what the client's looking for than a recruiter that's been a recruiter all their life. That will help develop those relationships. I have clients right now that say, we know that when you send us a candidate, this is going to be a well-qualified candidate because you don't send us unqualified candidates. And so that's already building that relationship of trust. And so I can continue to move the process along to where, hey, when we first started, it made sense for me to be a contingency recruiter. You didn't know me. I didn't know you. We didn't know how this relationship was going to work out. But now we understand each other pretty well. I know what kind of candidates you're looking for. Again, not just based on experience and education, but culture, maybe some other types of characteristics that are not evident on a resume, but through my screening process, I can say, this is really somebody you need to talk to. They may not be 100% qualified on some of the characteristics, but they're definitely a great fit. And so you can move that process along with building that trust. And that's what I think is very important.
That makes a lot of sense. And as you were talking, thoughts about my experiences started to spin through my mind. And that included once we had filled different positions, that opened up that door. Next thing I know, I was going to coffee with the senior recruiter. And one recruiter in particular stands out more than the others, but I worked with her for years. And every time I had a need and I had the budget to go out and leverage a recruiter to help, she was the person that I went through. So yeah, and if she would have offered a different type of a model, I wonder what my thought process would have been. But if it would have saved me and the organization money and improved the quality of candidate, I absolutely believe that I would have entertained those conversations. So that makes a lot of sense. And so looking at your goal to be fully subscription based within 2 years, what's your strategy going from now creating this RAYWI framework? What's your strategy for moving to fully subscription based within 2 years?
One of the things that I have come across was, especially on the fractional side, is that it's not very well known. I'm not going to say I'm cutting edge. There are some recruiting companies that offer a fractional recruiting as a service, that type of subscription based, but it's not very well known. So the idea is continue along the process with contingency, try to see where it makes sense, move my existing clients into maybe a hybrid program where they do a little bit of contingency, and then we start to look at what this would look like on a subscription base. But also my client development is now refocused to clients that make more sense for a fractional or something beyond contingency. Perfect example is AEC. A large construction company has a need for a lot of engineers, mechanical, structural, civil, electrical engineers, and they have also a lot of trades. There's not a lot of variance between other than location. And so to me, that would make a lot of sense that, hey, maybe the conversation isn't straight to fractional. Maybe it's let me prove that I can actually recruit for you. And then when you get comfortable with me, let's move that conversation on to how can I best serve you where I'm saving you money, I'm saving you time, you're getting the best possible candidates out of me. And like I said, maybe we integrate predictive index in there. Maybe we integrate line of sight in there. Maybe I help you on some occasions with self-sourcing. What platforms work best for the type of recruiting you're doing? Maybe it's something that I don't need to help. I don't need to do, or I don't need to recruit those types of positions, but you can do it from self-sourcing. But let's also look at my experience, leverage my experience in the recruiting industry to say, if you're looking for these types of candidates, this is the platform that you need to go look. Or if you're interested in using AI in sourcing, here are some platforms. And based on what you're trying to do, this is the right platform that fits.
Right. You're the trusted guide, and that makes a lot of sense. It's all about that relationship. This also speaks to me relative to best practices from a referral perspective. You don't ask somebody you just met for referrals.
Right.
The recommendation from a best practice perspective is there's going to come a point where that relationship is at an incredible positive. That is the right point to start asking for referrals. And of course, there's always a professional, polite way to do that as well. Does that resonate with you?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I will tell you that probably for 6 years, I was just lazy with client development because I kept getting referrals. And the referrals came from existing clients. It came from candidates that I had placed. They're like, hey, I really liked your process. I've left the company that you recruited me for. I went to a new company, and I know that you can find these types of candidates. Can I refer you to my HR director or my CEO? I think you would help us find the kind of people that we're looking for. So, yeah, referral based business is always a great business because you don't look in the phone book for a recruiter, just like you don't look in the phone book for a coach, right? You're looking for someone that, hey, this is who I'm using. It may or may not be appropriate for you, but at least have a conversation to see if this is the right fit for you.
And it seems to me if they are referring you, then that could be an awesome point in which to have that. Hey, would you like to consider a couple of other options that could
Right.
generate faster, better, more quality results and save your organization money?
Yeah, absolutely.
So you've got a huge network and you've been growing your network for a period of time. Within that network, how do you mine all those connections to determine who's best to reach out to, who's best to begin some of these conversations?
I think that's probably just like any kind of network. Some of your network are going to be friends of yours that don't really have any connections to business relationships. But then there are plenty of those that I've reached out to the people that I've known for 20 or 30 years, not in a recruiting context, but in a different context. And I noticed that you're friends with this other person that's a target company of mine. Would you mind making an introduction? And so it's a mining exercise that you do for any kind of mining, setting up the right parameters, but then not being so mercenary about it. Occasionally, I've done this where I'm like, hey, I haven't talked to this person or I haven't communicated with this person in 10 years. And now all of a sudden I have a need. But I will tell them, I'm sorry that we haven't communicated, but I do have a need. Would you be willing to help? And if the answer is no, that's okay. I get it. But it's also important that you have these connections. I mean, people will say, "Hey, I'd like to connect with you for a business reason," and if I see that there's a real connection there, I want to have a conversation with that person. It may only be via LinkedIn or via email, but I want to at least get to understand them a little bit because if someday they say, "Hey, I need help. Can you help me?" I'm not going completely cold. I'm not going to introduce them to somebody in my network and well, Ed, sorry, I don't know anybody about this person, but here's what they're looking for. I don't want to do that because that's really not very genuine. It's not helping either party out either.
Right.
It's like you reach out to me and saying, hey, you have this connection. And I say, yeah, but I haven't talked to that person in 30 or 40 years, or worse yet, we don't get along. How good of a
Yeah, they're not necessarily going to refer you, right? I'm sitting here laughing as you're talking, and I'm laughing at myself because, I'm an engineer, I'm a great problem solver, I'm an excellent visionary and strategist, but when it came to getting into this business and learning some of these things, I will tell you, I learned them the hard way. And I can remember going out and saying, hey, so it's to the audience, it's all about the relationship first. If you're reaching out to people and you haven't talked to them in 6, 12 months, a year, 10 years, don't start with, hey, would you help me out? Start with rekindling that relationship. Is that a fair statement?
yes, absolutely.
So, when you consider the journey that we've taken with our audience over these 3 sessions, we've talked about trust. We've talked about the conservative nature of business leaders, creating genuine trust and building meaningful connections, and along with the systems and processes that you're leveraging and people try to leverage out there to build that trust. What's one thing that you would like to pass along to our audience out of everything we've talked about that says if you were going through an innovation paradox, you've got something that's better, greater, and provides great value, but you can't get traction with it? What is the one message that you'd leave them with?
Well, I would say when you're trying to change a paradigm, that means your new solution's going to directly conflict or it's going to go against decades of entrenched habits or conventional wisdom. And it's inherently difficult because, let's face it, most people are adverse to change or resistant to change at the very least. And so you got to try to figure out a way to overcome or bypass the complexity of your new model. And you need to focus on the emotional and financial costs of the status quo for the customer. Instead of saying something like, we offer fractional recruiting, it's more like, hey, we eliminate the risk of the bad hire and stress a sudden $30,000 fee by fixing your talent pipeline with a predictable monthly budget.
I love that. That is great. Love that messaging. Any final
Yeah.
words of wisdom for our audience?
Probably the most important is stay the course. If you have a good system, if you know that this system can actually help people, stay the course. It may be difficult, but the reward in the end could also be phenomenal. I mean, Look at Jeff Bezos and Amazon. Amazon was a small book company when he bought it. He was not in the logistics industry. He was not in the book industry. He was not in fulfillment industry, but he had an idea and he took that idea and now multi-billion-dollar company. And 30 years ago, who would have thought that Amazon would be so pervasive in our life today? I mean, eBay's there. There are some other Amazon type of companies out there, but no one's done fulfillment like Amazon. And it wasn't like, hey, he came from Walmart or he came from a huge distributor that understood logistics. He was a venture capitalist, but he had this great idea and he figured out how to make it work. So we can all do the same thing. We can all create our own Amazons, but you got to stay the course. You got to understand when things are not working, and you got to. I worked for a company one time where the prevalent thought from that company was, if you're not doing it our way, you're doing it wrong, which is a great idea. It briefs well, but the reality was that it didn't work. People thought, I can do it a different way. You don't need to lecture me on the correct way. And the end result was they faced a lot of serious struggles. They had great products, but they couldn't get away from their focus versus the customer focus.
Yeah, stringent, unempowering culture. And to your Amazon point, how long was it before Bezos finally made money with Amazon? A couple of decades?
Yeah, it was a couple of decades. Yeah, I do remember that. He went at least 15 years with them not making money, but he stayed the course. He still had a great idea. He just hadn't figured out how to make it profitable, but he also got to a point where it was extremely profitable.
Incredible company today. Nick, what a powerful place to land this conversation and really the whole three-part journey. We started back in episode 1 by naming the problems so many innovative business owners face. You can have a clearly better solution and still struggle to get it to market. In episode 2, we pulled back the curtain on that emotional side of the resistance, the conservative nature of business leaders, the fear of being the one who bets on a new model, and how transparency and genuine human connections start to dissolve that fear. And today, we cross the implementation bridge by breaking down the systems process and the relationship habits that turn a bold idea like fractional subscription-based recruiting into predictable outcomes and real measurable value for your clients. If you're listening and you're sitting on a paradigm shifting solution of your own, the invitation from this series is simple. Don't just tweak your pitch, rethink how you build trust, including how you emotionally de-risk the decision for your buyers and how you operationalize your model so results become repeatable instead of accidental. Take one concrete action from today, whether it's defining your ideal client relationships, mapping a transition plan for existing customers, or documenting one key process, and put it into motion this week while the insights are fresh. Nick, thank you again for letting us use your fractional recruiting transition as a live case study, for being so open about both the challenges and the wins along the way. And to everyone watching or listening, thank you for investing your time with us across this mini-series. Your willingness to think differently is exactly what elevates not just your business, but the clients and communities you serve. If this conversation sparks something for you, share this episode with another business owner who's trying to drive change in a traditional workspace, and let us know what you're implementing as a result. Until next time, keep elevating your business one intentional decision at a time. Have a great holiday season, everyone.